St. James is one of 10 school districts in Minnesota this fall that can only afford to provide school 4 days a week. Right here at Minnesota State Mankato, 1 out of every 7 professors was laid off last March.
You don't stop working until the work is done. And I know where I came from, and I will never forget who I'm fighting for.
And we need a governor now who's going to make sure that we make our Minnesota education #1 again.
Back when I was Commissioner of Economic Development for Minnesota, under the last great jobs governor, Rudy Perpich, and we had a progressive tax system, Minnesota was consistently in the top third of the states in the nation in employment growth, usually in the top 10. During the first 7 of Governor Plenty's 8 years, Minnesota's averaged in the bottom 10 states in employment growth.
My first priority will be in creating jobs. I'm going to do it in some specific ways, and our budget is more than a math problem. It has to be reflecting our priorities: jobs, education, and health care.
You know, I used to say that if Mississippi was the national leader because it cut so much, then we would know that's the route that we should follow. And South Dakota's followed that route as well. The minimum wage and a strong jobs program, those are values that we've had in Minnesota. And Tom Emmer doesn't reflect those values.
Well, immediately after taking the oath of office, I will lean down and sign an executive order that will bring $1.4 billion home to the state of Minnesota. By the end of my first term, it's 30,000 jobs in Minnesota. It means the entire general assistance medical care population is covered, and 20,000 more.
What we've seen over the last 8 years is a budget that's balanced on the backs of the vulnerable, the elderly, our small towns, a budget that does not reflect Minnesota values or Minnesota priority. The budget of Tim Pawlenty and of Tom Emmer, to the contrary, is a budget that says that we should go backwards.
If any one of the 4 budgets that I had proposed as Speaker of the Minnesota House had passed, we would not be borrowing from schools right now. We would not be in this fiscal mess. And what's happened is that Governor Tim Pawlenty and Tom Emmer said no. That Tom Emmer is not the right direction to move on this front. His commitment to cut 30% of the state budget, I want to be clear about this, that's not 30% of the deficit he's talking about, that's 30% of the entire budget, will impact early childhood. It will devastate K-12 education in this state.
No Child Left Behind is a disaster. It is a total disaster. It is labeling our schools. Teachers are teaching to tests as opposed to teaching to the highest levels that we need to have. And I disagree with Representative Kelliher. I don't think it's worth sticking with something just because the federal government says they want it in a certain way.
Again, under Governor Pawlenty, the average per pupil aid has been cut in real after inflation dollars by $1,300 per student. That's why we're going to 4-day school weeks increasingly around this state. I asked my staff, where else in this country do they have 4-day school weeks? Well, there are a few other states in the rural Louisiana. So great. Now our education system is following the footsteps of rural Louisiana.
And Matt, we have to be honest that no state in the country has opted out of No Child Left Behind. We need to reform No Child Left Behind. I don't support No Child Left Behind. We need to reform it.
Well, you can put lipstick on the pig, but it's still a pig. And NCLB is one heck of a pig. One of the things that our state legislative auditor, who is, by the way, nonpartisan, wrote in a report a couple years ago, is that the cost in Minnesota state dollars of No Child Left Behind was going to exceed any money that we might lose from the federal government.
I've been to China 7 times. I've seen some of those 1.3 billion people willing to work and work very hard, 120 hours a week for 60, 70 cents an hour. Jobs used to be here. I visited one Nike plant outside of Shanghai, 5,000 workers. They said 250 pairs of hands touches every pair of Nike shoes. I mean, that's what we call in globalization the race to the bottom in terms of wages. Some of those jobs are going to Cambodia, where they'll work for 30 cents an hour.
A governor who comes from Worthington, who hasn't forgotten where he comes from, who knows that our best days are in front of us when we come together to refocus on education and job growth, that we don't make promises we can't keep, but instead we're focused on making sure, will the next generation do better.
When I worked for Governor Perpich, he had a sign in his governor's office that I'll put back if I'm governor: none of us are as smart as all of us. I'm proud of being the only Minnesotan on Richard Nixon's enemies list, a young man for standing up to an unjust war.
Well, first of all, I've been in the arena. It's been a tough time in the last 4 years. I've gotten knocked down from time to time. But you know what I keep doing? I keep standing up and fighting on behalf of Minnesotans. I've been called the calm within the storm. I've been respected by Democrats and Republicans.
I think that Democrats and Republicans and independents need a leader who's going to help bring people together, which is why you won't hear me talk about fighting, because I don't believe we should be fighting for things. I believe that we need to be bringing people together.
We rank 32nd among the states in the nation in spending on K-12 education as a percent of our personal income, 34th higher education, under Governor Palente's assistance of protecting the richest Minnesotans from paying their fair share of taxes. Now, can I find middle ground with the CEOs of Target Corporation and Best Buy who are putting hundreds of thousands of dollars behind the Republican candidate for governor because they don't want to pay higher taxes?
Minnesotans don't find it incompatible that you're going to stand up. Their governor is going to stand up for them and fight for what they need: fair and progressive taxes, better health care, education for all of our kids, and still be able to bring people together. That's been my track record. That is my history. I'm so happy to do that work of bringing people together.
Will you restore LGA? LGA cuts are killing rural Minnesota.
Yes, I would restore those cuts. I will, again, raise the revenues. The only one who's going to raise revenues sufficient to avoid these kind of continuing cuts. And, of course, the Republican candidate, Tom Emmer, wants to eliminate local government aids.
And in my budget, I am planning to fund at the level that it should be funded at in the 2012 budget. And that means restoring those cuts. I've had a lot of experience in bringing people together. These have been tough years, the last 4 years. Being in this arena, being in the fight, having to stand up to Tim Pawlenty, having to create an override over this governor, has taught me a lot about what we need to do.
Well, the so-called compromise arrived between Governor Pawlenty and the legislature in the last session proved to be a terrible disaster for especially the hospitals in greater Minnesota, and it will be corrected if I'm governor. I will support the early opt-in to Medicaid and provide that stabilization of funding.
Well, I think one of the most morally bankrupt things that has ever been done in Minnesota politics and Minnesota public policy was Governor Pawlenty's veto of general assistance medical care, because it was unnecessary. He did it to spite people. Early opt-in to MA. This governor did not want to do that. The next governor has the opportunity, 15 days in the first term, to sign an executive order and bring that $1.4 billion home. $1.4 billion that Congressman Walz voted for, that Senator Klobuchar fought for. And you know what? We need to bring it home. That's the first thing I'll do.
That's why, as governor, I will immediately sign an executive order to leverage federal funds so that we can restore the cuts that hurt the over 30,000 people who relied on general assistance medical care.
And what I've learned now in this last months of traveling and listening to Minnesotans is that our future is at stake and this state is in crisis. And if we continue going in the wrong direction as we are today, we will be a state that we don't want to leave to our children and grandchildren.
I was honored to receive the DFL endorsement from thousands of Minnesotans, hardworking Minnesotans, who share values that include that our best days are yet to come. DFLers picked me to be their next governor because they know I stand up and fight for them. I will stand up on behalf of them. I never quit. I never back down.
I was able to get an opportunity. And now we need a governor who's going to make sure that all of Minnesota has an opportunity. I have stood up to Tim Pawlenty and made Tim Pawlenty blink. The DFL hasn't been able to do that very many times.